Recapitalizing financial institutions is important. I know the newspapers believe Wall Street and Main Street are different subjects. We know as economists that's silly. They're a coin with two sides. The third is capital. In an environment of falling asset prices, policy should take every effort not to reduce asset prices and, if possible, raise them. There are three kinds of taxes that are capitalized in the value of assets: the corporation income tax, the dividend tax, and the capital gains tax. The president-elect has had views in particular on two of the three of those, but one of them, the corporate income tax, strikes me as one ripe for discussion and ripe for a very large positive capitalization effect with good policy. And the fourth is a collateral issue, and here I have in mind housing, which, as I said before, is the elephant in the room. I'll be brief because I know you're going to hear a lot about this today, but I think it is possible to raise house prices substantially. Falling house prices that continue to bring down consumer balance sheets and the balance sheets of financial institutions make the recovery very difficult. As Bruce said, Chris Mayer, my colleague on your panel, and I have a proposal. Chris kidded me last night that it's a chicken in every pot. I've turned from Andrew Mellon to FDR overnight. And what we're going to do is propose a 4.5% mortgage for every American. So if you want to buy a house, we're your guys. Now, what are some long-term policy issues that are raised by this crisis? The first, I think, is for members of Congress, starting with Congressman Frank and Senator Dodd, to take a deep breath. That is very hard to do in something like this, because it strikes me that there are two principles that you have to keep in mind if this indeed is going to be again like 1933. The first is that if you're going to have a reform that makes sense for the long term, not just a quick fix, it's got to be able to mold the incentives of private sector actors, meaning some of you in this room, meaning CEOs of financial institutions, meaning professional investors, to mold their incentives in such a way that the system sufficiently almost self-regulates. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take the capital requirements that we now know are part of our problem. Imagine if instead we did have a different system. Spain is actually a very good example of this, where capital requirements move over the cycle much like a progressive income tax. So in a boom, one holds proportionately more capital, not just absolutely more capital, and in a bust, the converse. That provides a natural straitjacket to those adrenaline-flowing finance CEOs in a boom and a cushion in a bust. There are many ways of implementing such a proposal, but it's a very, very good idea. Another family of proposals in that regard are contingent capital requirements or insurance mechanisms. The second principle, it strikes me, is to focus on systemic risk and not failure. I know that in the public's eye, those sound like they're similar. We should not fear failure, even the failure of very large institutions. It's unpleasant. Trust me, as somebody who sells 1,000 MBAs a year, it is very unpleasant. But having said that, some institutions need to fail. The question is, are there institutions out there with legitimate systemic risk? Identifying those institutions is important. It is also difficult. As I'll argue in a second, regulation needs to think about focusing more on systemically important institutions. That's obvious ex post, but who they are ex ante can sometimes be very difficult. An actor might be a large bank, but it could just as easily be an insurance company. It could just as easily be a hedge fund. There are a lot of issues that I expect to come up next year. Exchange-traded derivatives has already come up. Securitization, what I call the old-fashioned way, meaning you hold a piece of what you originate. And something that Bruce didn't mention, or at least I didn't hear, corporate governance reform, and in particular executive compensation. I think we will see institutional reforms, and I think there will be a big discussion of the FSA model. I think it's clear in the U.S. that the SEC was not up to the task before it. It failed. And the question is, should there be a new institution? I would argue that an institution that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Federal Reserve, something like an FSA, makes a lot of sense. I know there have been some issues with the FSA in the UK. I'm not saying that it is perfect, but I do believe it is a step in the right direction. There are two legislative wins in the sail that will guarantee that discussion. One is issue of reform of the SEC itself. The other is the touchstone for many Democratic members of Congress for something akin to a Consumer Product Safety Commission for financial products. That legislative vehicle provides the wind in the sail. Now, wherein lies the next problem? That's a course of interest to people. Obviously, I don't know. If I did know, I would keep it to myself and trade on it. But I can give you some hints. Some suspects are surely unwinding the current Fed interventions. Moving toward quantitative easing is extremely difficult to do. I know in a textbook it sounds easy. It is extremely difficult to do in practice, and even more extremely difficult to exit from. That's a potential banana peel. A second is a fiscal crisis. It's one thing to borrow $1 trillion in a period like this, but as soon as the economy starts to recover, if we can't get the fiscal house in order, that is another banana peel. And a third that's a very near-term issue is perhaps a realization that the stimulus package that's in the newspaper every day as the sure Santa Claus really can't fix the economy the way it's meant to. The arithmetic hole in GDP over the next several quarters is probably about the size of the stimulus package being discussed, that is 5 to 7% of American GDP. It is very difficult to design a stimulus package that is truly stimulus, by which I would mean affecting the real economy in 12 to 18 months of that size, without a material change in the tax code. That's very different than what the administration has talked about. So that's an issue. I think there are two lessons for us as economists. One is to focus perhaps not just on scenario planning when we talk, but to think about underlying events and trends. Just as I said to you that very low real interest rates were something that were a harbinger of things to come, I can easily see a world in which that trend is reversed, in which domestic financial systems are improved in large emerging economies, fiscal imbalances here in the United States, a world in which real interest rates are higher for a period of time is a world with very different implications for a wide variety of asset prices and financial strategies. The second thing I would urge in this for us as economists is more interaction with key practitioners. One of the things that has become apparent to me through this is that many market developments were simply getting ahead of us as economists. Now we look at them and say, oh my God, if I looked at that particular institution, it's either borrowing short and lending long, but using fancy words to describe it, or imposing leverage that didn't make sense. But where were we in real time? In a period of very rapid financial innovation, we need to get in that mix. But let me close by giving some advice as you all prepare, and we all prepare today to listen to everything and to hopefully exit from a financial crisis. And here I'm going to take some advice from somebody even better than Don Rumsfeld in talking about the economy, and that's a Chinese fortune cookie. And I came across one the other day that struck me as good advice for the Federal Reserve in thinking about this crisis, that riding a flying tiger is actually easy. It's just the landing that's difficult. So again, welcome to Columbia. I hope you enjoy the conference today. It promises to be excellent. Thanks.